The coin. The dust storms of Varith had a way of getting into everything: lungs, eyes, machinery. Lieutenant Daniel Kade had been stranded here for 3 days, and already the ochre-colored grit had claimed his ship's engines, his water purifier, and most of his hope. He had survived crash landings before. He was a fleet engineer, after all, trained to wrestle miracles out of metal. But this time the Argent Dawn was no more than scorched wreckage scattered across the plain, and he was just one man against an unforgiving alien world. The locals had been watching him from a distance. Small figures, cloaked in patched fabric, their eyes glinting like polished stones from beneath heavy hoods. They never approached, not until hunger began to weigh on him like lead. It was on the 4th morning that one of them came forward. Daniel had been crouched near the wreck, prying apart a half-melted ration container for anything edible, when he heard a shuffling sound. Turning, he saw a creature no taller than his waist. Its body was thin, fragile, like brittle wood bent under too many storms. It wore a hood of woven reeds, frayed and dust-worn, and its long fingers clutched a small object to its chest. The alien's voice, when it spoke, was a tremor of sound, soft, careful. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the intent. It was begging. Daniel's throat tightened. He had no food to give, no water. He barely had enough for himself. He shook his head, meaning to wave the small figure away. But the alien persisted, stepping closer. It opened its hand. In its palm lay a single coin. The metal caught the weak sunlight, dull but enduring. It wasn't much, just a disc, uneven around the edges, engraved with a spiral symbol that might have meant anything. Daniel blinked. The alien was offering it to him. He crouched slowly, careful not to frighten it. "Why?" he asked, voice rough from thirst. "Why give this to me?" The alien tilted its head, eyes dark and shining. It pressed the coin into his hand with surprising firmness, then retreated a step. Its frail chest rose and fell quickly, as if the act had cost it dearly. Daniel looked at the coin. It wasn't valuable, not by human standards. But the gesture was unmistakable. A gift. The last possession of a beggar, given freely to a stranger from the stars. For the first time since the crash, Daniel felt something break through the despair weighing on him. Not hope, not yet, but a spark of connection. He closed his hand over the coin and nodded to the little alien. "Thank you," he whispered. The creature bowed its head, then scurried back toward the dunes, where the others watched in silence. That night, Daniel sat beneath the shattered wing of his ship, turning the coin over in his fingers. The metal was warm from his touch, the spiral etching deep enough to feel with his thumb. He wondered what it had meant to its former owner. A family heirloom? A token of faith? Or simply the last scrap of wealth in a world that had forgotten prosperity? Whatever it was, he had been trusted with it. And that mattered. Daniel was not a diplomat. He wasn't trained for first-contact scenarios, not like the xenoanthropologists back on Earth. But he knew fairness. He knew gratitude. And he knew that this coin, simple as it seemed, demanded something in return. He looked out at the horizon, where the stars burned cold and unreachable. Somewhere out there, the fleet was searching for him. If rescue came, when it came, he would remember this moment. He would remember the alien beggar who had given him everything it had. And he swore to himself, beneath that endless alien sky, that humanity would repay that kindness 100-fold. The coin lay heavy in his palm, not with weight, but with promise. Hunger and kindness. The days after the beggar's gift passed in a haze of exhaustion. Daniel rationed the last of his water, chewing dried protein wafers that had survived the crash, though they tasted like ash. Every sunrise was sharper, hotter, and more merciless than the last. The coin never left his pocket. It was small comfort, but it reminded him that he was not completely alone. Someone on this barren world had seen him not as an invader, not as wreckage, but as a person. On the 6th day, the beggar returned. Daniel spotted the figure in the dunes before it reached him, a fragile silhouette against the burning sky. This time, the alien carried nothing in its hands. Instead, it approached cautiously, stopping a few meters away. The other cloaked figures lingered in the distance, watching. Daniel rose unsteadily to meet it. His lips were cracked, his voice hoarse. "You came back." The alien's head tilted, and though he could not read its expression, he felt the same quiet determination as before. It gestured toward his wreckage, then toward the horizon, as if urging him to follow. Daniel hesitated. He had no strength to wander aimlessly, and every instinct warned him against leaving the ruined ship. But something in the alien's eyes, dark, reflective, earnest, pushed him forward. He slung his emergency pack over his shoulder and followed. The walk was brutal. The sun hammered the desert with unrelenting fury, and Daniel's legs ached with each step. But the alien moved with surprising swiftness, guiding him through narrow canyons and ridges of rock. At last, they descended into a shallow basin, where a cluster of crude shelters leaned against the canyon walls. There were more of the creatures here, dozens of them, thin and weary, their cloaks patched with whatever scraps they could scavenge. Children peeked out from behind woven mats, their enormous eyes wide with curiosity. Daniel stopped, breathless, taking it all in. A village. The beggar who had given him the coin stepped forward, motioning him to sit. Daniel lowered himself onto a flat stone, unsure of what would happen next. From one of the shelters, a bowl was brought forth, clay, cracked along the rim, filled with something that looked like a thick paste. The beggar set it in front of him, then stepped back, waiting. Daniel stared. Food. His first instinct was refusal. He had nothing to offer in return. These people looked like they had little enough for themselves. To take from them felt wrong. But the beggar pressed the bowl closer, insistent. The others watched, silent but expectant. Daniel's throat tightened. Slowly, he lifted the bowl and took a small sip. The taste was earthy, bitter, but it soothed the burning in his stomach. Another sip, then another. The alien's eyes softened, and a low murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. When he finished, he set the bowl down carefully, bowing his head in thanks. The beggar touched its chest, then gestured toward him, an acknowledgement. Daniel swallowed hard. He had come to this planet as an accident, a broken man among wreckage. Yet here, in this hollowed canyon, strangers had fed him before he collapsed. Humanity had always told stories of alien hostility, of distant wars among the stars. But here was a people who had nothing, and still gave. That night, he lay near the fire pit at the center of the village. The stars above were strange, scattered in unfamiliar patterns, yet beautiful in their distance. Children huddled close to their parents, whispering in voices like wind through reeds. The beggar sat nearby, clutching a reed-woven cloak tightly around its thin shoulders. Daniel reached into his pocket and drew out the coin. Its spiral design glinted in the firelight. The beggar's eyes followed the motion, and Daniel extended the coin toward it. The alien shook its head, refusing. It pointed to him, then to the coin, then placed a hand over its own chest. The meaning was clear. Keep it. Daniel held it tightly. This was no simple trinket. It was a bond, a symbol of something greater than survival. He lay awake long after the others had fallen asleep, staring at the stars. If rescue came, if he ever made it back to humanity, he would remember this village. He would tell their story. He would make sure they were not forgotten in the silence of the cosmos. He had come to Verith by accident. But he was beginning to understand that what happened here would change not only his life, but the fate of two worlds. The coin gleamed faintly in his hand, heavy with promise. And for the first time since the crash, Daniel dreamed not of escape, but of return with a gift worthy of the kindness he had been shown. The signal. On the 12th night after the crash, Daniel's emergency beacon finally broke through the storms. The little transmitter, half crushed in the wreck, had sputtered weakly for days until he managed to repair its cracked power cell with strips of alloy and prayer. The moment it flickered green, he knew. Help was coming. But the thought was not relief alone, it was conflict. He had come to know the beggar's people in those days. They called themselves the Yel'ri, or something close to it, their voices carrying the name like a soft whistle. Their world was harsh, their resources dwindling, yet every day they offered him shelter, water drawn from cracked cisterns, food scraped from root beds deep beneath the dunes. The beggar, who now stayed at his side always, had become a companion in silence. They had no shared words, but gestures and patience bridged the gap. The alien would touch its chest, then point at him, a way of saying we are the same. And Daniel believed it. So when the fleet ship's thrusters finally roared against the sky 2 days later, Cutting through the clouds like a new sun, the Yel'ri did not scatter in fear. They gathered in the basin, heads tilted upward, watching the descent of fire and steel. Daniel stood among them, the coin clutched tight in his palm. The Silver Reach was a frigate, gleaming with Earth's technology, its hull unmarred by desert storms. When the landing ramp lowered, armored figures hurried down, rescue crew, medics, soldiers. "Lieutenant Kade," one of them shouted, voice booming through a speaker. "We've got you. Let's get you home." Daniel stepped forward, but his gaze stayed on the Yel'ri. The beggar hovered at his side, cloaked and frail, eyes shining. The medic reached for him, scanning his vitals. "You've lost weight. Dehydration, malnutrition. You're lucky you survived at all." "Not luck," Daniel said quietly. He gestured toward the Yel'ri. "Them." The medic frowned, clearly seeing little more than a cluster of starving aliens. "We'll run a containment perimeter. Get you clear." "No," Daniel's voice hardened. He shook his head. "These people saved me. I won't let them be treated like a threat." The soldiers exchanged uncertain glances. But Daniel was an officer, and his authority still carried weight. Hours later, aboard the Silver Reach, Daniel sat in the debriefing chamber. His commanding officer, Captain Wren, listened with her arms folded as he spoke. "They gave me their last meal when I had nothing. One of them handed me this." He set the coin on the table, the spiral etching catching the sterile light. "It was all they had." Wren studied it, expression unreadable. "You're saying they're a noble people." "I'm saying," Daniel replied, "that if humanity claims to stand for honor, for gratitude, then we cannot leave this world as it is. They're starving, dying, yet they still gave." Wren leaned back. "You're asking for intervention." "I'm asking," Daniel said, voice steady, "for repayment. They gave a beggar's coin to a stranger. I want to give them something back. Something worthy." Silence stretched between them. Then Wren exhaled, slow. "Kade, you understand what you're proposing? Planetary resource allocation, seeding initiatives, it's not small." Daniel closed his hand around the coin. Neither was their kindness. When Wren finally nodded, Daniel felt something shift inside him. Not victory, not relief, but a beginning. Within days, survey drones mapped the Yel'ri world. The planet was poor in metals, but its crust was rich with carbon veins. With the fleet's replicators and terraforming arrays, diamonds could be seeded, not for human greed, but for survival. The crystals would purify water, stabilize soil, even serve as trade when the galaxy discovered them. The Yel'ri gathered in silence as the first machines hummed to life. Daniel stood among them, explaining in words they could not understand but in tone they felt. This was gift, not conquest. The beggar touched his arm, then pressed its fingers to the spiral coin still hanging at his belt. Daniel smiled faintly. "Yeah," he whispered. "This is for you." The sky glowed with the light of human machines, scattering sparks across the basin like falling stars. For the first time in memory, the Yel'ri lifted their voices in song, a thin, reedy melody that rose above the hum of engines. And Daniel Kade, once a stranded survivor, knew he had kept his promise. Humanity had not only come for him. Humanity had come for them. The coin was no longer just a symbol of survival. It was the spark of a covenant between worlds. Jewels for a beggar's gift. The machines worked for weeks, drilling and seeding the crust of Verith with crystalline matrices. Where the soil had once cracked with drought, irrigation veins now shimmered with purity, filtered through diamond-laced structures beneath the ground. The technology was not ostentatious, not made for wealth, but for survival. The Yel'ri watched in awe as rivers returned to their basins, as wells filled with clear water, as the roots of their withering crops took hold again. The desert still stretched vast and unforgiving, but it no longer ruled them with starvation. Daniel walked the canyons often, checking the progress of the work crews, but more than that, staying among the Yel'ri. They no longer looked at him as a stranger. Children ran to him with shrill laughter, tugging at his hands, daring him to chase them through the reed huts. Elders touched his shoulders in blessing. And always, the beggar who had given him the coin remained close, as though their fates had become twined. One evening, as the twin moons rose and spilled silver light across the basin, Captain Wren joined Daniel at the canyon's edge. They looked out at the shimmering glow of the seeded crystals beneath the surface, faintly visible where the soil was thin. It was as if stars themselves had been buried in the world's bones. Wren's voice was quiet. "You know what the Council will say when they hear of this. Diamonds seeded on a planetary scale? They'll see profit, trade routes, politics." Daniel nodded. "They will. But that's not why we did it." He looked down at the village, where the Yel'ri sang around a fire. "We did it because someone gave me a coin when they had nothing. That act deserves more than a thank you. It deserves legacy." Wren studied him for a long moment. Then she gave a small, rare smile. "You've changed, Kade." "Maybe," he said softly. "Or maybe I just finally saw what humanity should be." The next day, Daniel called the Yel'ri together. He stood before them with translators and projection screens, but he barely used them. Instead, he held the coin high, its spiral glinting in the sun. "This," he said, his voice carrying over the canyon, "was given to me when I had nothing. A gift from one of your own." He turned, meeting the beggar's shining eyes. "This coin is the reason you now have water, food, and a future." The translator repeated his words in the Yel'ri tongue, and a murmur rippled through the crowd. The beggar clutched its chest, eyes wet with emotion. Daniel set the coin in the center of the gathering place, placing it on a stone pedestal the engineers had carved. "This will stay here, forever. Not as mine, but as yours. A reminder that one act of kindness can change the fate of worlds." The Yel'ri bowed their heads, their voices rising in a low chant. The beggar stepped forward and touched the coin once more, then touched Daniel's hand. In that moment, no translation was needed. When the silver reach prepared to depart, Daniel lingered at the ramp. He had been offered honors, commendations, a return to Earth as a survivor and hero. But all he could think of was the canyon, the song of the Yel'ri, and the coin gleaming on its pedestal. The beggar stood at the foot of the ramp, cloak fluttering in the wind. It raised a hand in farewell, and Daniel raised his own in return. "I'll come back," he promised. "Not just me, humanity. We'll make sure your people are never forgotten." The alien tilted its head, and though it said nothing, Daniel felt the weight of its belief. As the frigate rose into the sky, the engine scattering dust like golden fire, Daniel pressed a hand to his chest where the coin had once rested. The Yel'ri had given him survival. He had given them jewels. But beyond all that, they had given each other something rarer still, trust. Years later, when the first great trade routes reached Verith, merchants would speak of a desert world where rivers glittered as though laced with stars, and where a people once forgotten had become keepers of wealth beyond measure. But to the Yel'ri, the riches were not the diamonds themselves. It was the memory of a stranded man who had carried their beggar's coin into the heavens, and returned with a promise fulfilled. Humanity had proved itself not through conquest, but through gratitude. And for all the galaxies yet to be explored, the story would endure. An alien beggar gave a stranded human his only coin. In return, humanity seeded their planet with jewels.